What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review The Beekeeper, directed by David Ayer and starring Jason Statham. I saw it in IMAX last night, and while it was a lot of fun to go to an IMAX theater, I made a critical blunder or mistake by going to a theater that was too close to Times Square on Saturday night in New York, which just means that it was total bedlam inside the theater, but I don't know if that experience had a negative impact or a positive impact on my impressions of the movie, but I'm reluctant to say, and it brings me no pleasure to say that I think The Beekeeper is kind of terrible. And the reason I say I'm reluctant to say that is because I like Jason Statham. I like David Ayer. I feel like David Ayer, he's made good movies, he's made bad movies, and most of his movies are kind of an interesting blend of the two. But this is the first David Ayer movie which I would say is kind of disposable or forgettable, where his fingerprints or his style is totally absent from the movie. And in a lot of ways, it almost felt like a moment where he would kind of pause with his career and just do a piece of commercial entertainment that is totally divorced from his personality or style or interests, just to prove that he could be a commercial filmmaker again, because there was a period where it seemed like he was just on the cusp of exploding and becoming the next big thing. Right around the time where he did the original Suicide Squad, followed by Bright, and he was doing these big franchise movies, it seemed like he might have a career like James Gunn or Sam Raimi or one of these directors who makes a lot of big blockbusters in the world of established franchises. But the movies, your opinions may vary on how effective those movies were or were not. I think his most satisfying movie is probably still Fury, which has some kick-ass tank battles from World War II. But no matter what your opinion on his movies might be, if you go see The Beekeeper, if you were not aware that it was a David Ayer movie ahead of time, there's not a single scene or a single moment that feels like a David Ayer movie. It feels like it could have been directed by anybody. This is just a good old-fashioned, formulaic Jason Statham star vehicle. And if you like good old-fashioned formulaic star vehicles for Jason Statham, you will enjoy The Beekeeper. My audience did applaud, but how can I describe my audience? I was sitting next to this family of Russians, and the reason I know they're Russian is because the wife or the mother in the group, she had a watch which kept screaming at her in Russian, but she spent the entire movie kind of berating her husband while pointing angrily at the screen, probably trying to explain the plot to her kid. Her kid seemed pretty cool. The kid was very well behaved, didn't say a peep the whole movie. The wife was a true Gorgon in many ways, shape, or form. So I felt like I was kind of watching her and the movie at the same time. But let's not get sidetracked talking shit about my fellow New Yorkers. What is the plot of The Beekeeper? Here it is, straight from IMDb. In The Beekeeper, one man's brutal campaign for vengeance takes on national stakes after he is revealed to be a former operative of a powerful and clandestine organization known as Beekeepers. And I'm feeling like I'm getting dumber just by saying it, because it'd be one thing if like Beekeepers was just a term that they introduced in the movie, but it was more or less kind of a convincing kind of secret agent or secret assassin movie. But they take the metaphor to such an absurd length, or they magnify it to such an absurd degree over the course of the movie, where it just becomes one of the most idiotic action movies imaginable. Because Jason Statham's character, it'd be one thing if you kind of took a few pages from the book of the way that bees operate, which kind of informs his overall approach to his job. Because the job of the beekeepers is basically to look after the hive, independent from any concerns from individual politicians or different agencies, whether that's the CIA or the FBI or whatever. And that I can kind of go with. But over the course of the movie, he comes across like a simpleton or like an overgrown child, where he looks at everything from the point of view of how bees operate, and how if the queen bee is producing, ineffective or kind of faulty offspring, then it's the job of the other bees to remove the queen bee. And I was like, all right, y'all are taking your metaphor way too fucking seriously. But the reason I mention all this is because the main bad guy of the movie, Derek Danforth, played by Josh Hutcherson, he is the son of the President of the United States. And Josh Hutcherson is playing a character who's basically everybody's least favorite tech bro, kind of on steroids or cocaine or whatever source of stimulation you care to mention. And the source of his wealth is that he runs all these different call centers that are using phishing techniques to prey upon the gullible or the vulnerable, basically people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. They get an alert on their computer saying, you've been infected with deadly such and such. Call this number, we'll work it all out. And they're basically will trick you into giving them your passwords or your information so they can rob you blind. And I think the best the movie has to offer is like the first 30 minutes, where Jason Statham's character is living in retirement on this farm looking after bees. He's living on the property owned by a character played by Felicia Rashad, who I grew up watching on The Cosby Show. But she's still kicking, and she's great in this, but she gets taken advantage of, and she gets robbed blind, including a lot of charities that she works with. And so when Jason Statham learns what's happened, he decides to come out of retirement and start looking after the hive again by burning these call centers to the ground. But because of his kind of psychotic dedication to his beekeeper philosophy, he can't just stop at the call centers. He has to keep working his way up the chain, creating basically a national emergency where every single cop, an FBI agent, CIA agent, and former beekeeper and former SEAL Team 6, like basically everybody in the country might take an interest in what his mission is. Basically, it's Jason Statham versus the United States. And of course, because he's Jason Statham, with barely a scratch on his face or the occasional nick by a bullet, he basically beats the entire country. That's the only way I can describe what he does over the course of this film. And the longer the movie goes, the dumber it gets. But the first 30 minutes or so was pretty good. It had me on the hook, but as the movie continued to get into very strange and idiotic territory, I just kept thinking to myself, I hope Jeremy Irons was very well paid for this, because Jeremy Irons, he's doing his best. He's trying to kind of class it up a bit and add a little integrity to his role. He's the former head of the CIA, who's basically now working to babysit the son of the president, who just sits there and just kind of talks shit like solve my problems, blah, blah, blah. I mean, Josh Hutcherson, I think he's playing the character precisely as written, but he's so fucking annoying over the course of this movie. I feel like action movies need amazing villains, not dweebs. If you're going to be invested in an action movie, you have to feel like there's a credible threat or a credible badass who can beat the fuck out of the hero. And there are a few kind of killers for hire who pop up over the course of the movie, which give the character of Adam Clay a little trouble. But he pretty much sleepwalks through the whole movie, just fucking up everybody. And that's when your action movie is definitely in trouble. So if we were inclined to play the blame game and point fingers at some of the people responsible for this unique piece of modern cinema, I'm going to lay the blame, rightly or wrongly, on screenwriter Kurt Wimmer, because if this were his first movie, then I might be willing to say, oh, maybe the producers got in their way and kind of messed up the movie, or maybe the studio had weird demands. But if you look at his track record as a screenwriter, like, oh yeah, of course he wrote a movie precisely like The Beekeeper, because if you look at his credits, I mean, he's a very successful screenwriter. He's been working as a screenwriter since the early 90s, and the first movie by him that I saw was his remake of the Thomas Crown Affair, but he also wrote Street Kings, an earlier David Ayer movie, which I think is vastly superior to The Beekeeper. So yeah, if you want to see a Kurt Wimmer, David Ayer collaboration that works, see Street Kings. But he also wrote the remake of Total Recall. I feel like if you're going to remake Total Recall, you just should be put to death. He also did a remake of Point Break. Once again, if you do a remake of Point Break, you should be put to death. And then he did a remake of Children of the Corn. I'm noticing a recurring theme here. There are 4 fucking remakes so far in one filmography. That's too many remakes. It's like, write something original. I know he's working in an industry that has, opportunities for people who are willing to write remakes. But even when he writes an original movie like Expendables 4, well, then the results can still be disastrous. I'm just wondering, what are the hits in his filmography that has enabled him to rack up so many goddamn screenwriting credits? He's got over 20 writing credits. So I guess if he's going to write an autobiography about his career, it would be Getting Away with Murder for 30 years. But you could probably use the exact same title for Jason Statham's autobiography. And I say that with love and affection because I do love Jason Statham. I think he's got a cool screen persona, and he's obviously put in the work when it comes to learning kickboxing, learning how to do action choreography and that sort of thing. And every once in a while, he'll do a movie like Snatch, like, whoa, Jason Statham, he can fucking act. He's got chops. He brings something to the table. But he's also probably made more action movies in the last 25 years than anyone else alive. So high five to Jason Statham for just staying in business for a quarter century and basically playing the exact same role every single fucking time. But if I were to reduce or simplify all my grievances against this movie into just one takeaway or one criticism, it would be that the action scenes are not memorable. And if you're going to do kind of an idiotic star vehicle action movie starring Jason Statham, there better be 1 or 2 scenes where like, holy fuck, like that movie was idiotic, but that scene fucking ruled. Like that was so goddamn cool. And we never get that. I mean, if you want to see him walking around with canisters full of gasoline, burning down call centers that are, guilty of robbing people blind, you will get that in abundance. But we needed like one scene where it's just like, oh my God, like that fucking villain he fought was so goddamn cool. Or wasn't it cool the way he, murdered people with an elevator or chopped all their fingers off or whatever the case might be. The movie gets close to that in like the first 30 minutes where it puts its best foot forward. But this movie, it's almost like they had a good idea for a movie but had no idea where to go with it. And so they just completely lost control and let it spiral totally into strange and unusual territory. This movie should have never been about taking down the president of the United States. It should have stayed focused on Josh Hutcherson's character and just let him be the big baddie. And another major criticism I have on that front is that after having to listen to him speak and be annoying for an hour and a half, at a minimum, the audience deserved a memorable, gruesome, torturous, painful death for the character. It's like, we've been having to listen to him talk all this time. I want to see him die millimeter by millimeter as he shrieks in pain, just as revenge and payback for having to just like be in the same room with this character for all this time. And this movie went in the opposite direction. So that was yet another sin committed on behalf of this flick. But I hope it will make money. And that might sound strange to say when I disliked it so much, but the movie industry is going to struggle big time in 2024. There's going to be a lack of content, a lack of product, a lack of new big tentpole releases. And it's like, I'm not trying to sing a sad song on behalf of movie producers or big studios, but the theaters are going to struggle. The theaters are kind of, they're in a situation where the best they can do is release the movies that are offered to them. And they've got a few shortcuts that they figured out in recent years. Like when AMC partnered with Taylor Swift to distribute her concert film, none of the studios were involved. And I feel like that was a great proactive step by the theaters, putting more content out on their screens. But it seems like the big theater chains have remained in a perpetual state of existential crisis over the last couple of years. So I feel like one of two things needs to happen. Either the big studios need to invest in these theater chains and recognize we are partners in this endeavor. Studios do better when they have big tentpole releases, and theaters do better when they have a steady flow of movies. But if the studios aren't able to cut the mustard or aren't up to the task of providing a steady stream of new releases, then AMC and Regal and all these big theater chains, they should get into the business of investing in original production so that there will never be a gap on the schedule at any given time. Because frankly, I'm kind of sick and tired of constantly hearing how the theater chains are in trouble and what are we going to do about it. It's like, well, then somebody needs to think big and take a calculated financial gamble or calculated financial risks that will guarantee that AMC, Regal, or Alamo Drafthouse or any of these theaters that they never will have to worry about a lack of content or a lack of product at any time in the future. And so we'll see what the future brings, but I think 2024 is going to be a very sad and alarming year for theater chains unless some sort of major changes come. So while I'm rooting for movies to do well, I'm rooting for movies to find a big audience. And if last night's audience is any indication, there will be people who enjoy The Beekeeper. So fingers crossed it makes piles of money next week. But I don't think it's the job of channels devoted to film and television commentary to just be cheerleaders. If a movie fucking sucks, you have to be honest and call out its flaws. So there it is. That's my review for The Beekeeper. But just to end this video on a high note, I do want to sing the praises just a little bit of David Ayer because I feel like he's one of the few people out there who really paid their dues as a screenwriter, transitioned to low-budget movies as a director, and kind of climbed the ladder to bigger and brighter things. But if either Suicide Squad had been a bigger hit or Bright had taken off the way it was supposed to, we might be having a very different conversation about David Ayer. And I feel like he should be up there with like the giants doing his thing because he does have a signature style, and you can see that in his scripts. Like he wrote the screenplay for Training Day, one of the coolest LA crime thrillers of that period. And if you look at his movies as a director, I feel like he's got a lot of movies that are a mixed bag where they have great scenes and bad scenes. Movies like End of Watch or Sabotage or even Fury. I love Fury, but it's got like just 20-minute scene in the middle. Like, oh, this is some of the most self-indulgent nonsense that I've ever seen, where you can tell he's just letting his actors improvise to horrendous results. But the battle scenes in Fury are fucking bananas. And even Suicide Squad, which was a total misfire in so many ways, and we can play the blame game all day as to like who bears the ultimate responsibility for how that movie was recut in the final minute. But when that first trailer for Suicide Squad dropped I thought we were looking at I thought we were looking at what was going to be the best superhero movie of that period. People need to remember that 7 or 8 years ago, when the first trailer started appearing for Suicide Squad, we all thought it was going to be the next big thing. But we also have The Tax Collector from 2020, which I barely remember, although I did see, and if memory serves, I might have even given it some praise at the time, but almost all of that movie has completely fled from my brain. So I think it's kind of sad that David Ayer now is stuck in a position where he's doing movies without any signature style whatsoever, but fingers crossed he can rebound, and maybe the best is yet to come. Maybe he's still just one step away or on the cusp of delivering a great movie which will change his fortunes in the years to come. But I think I've talked enough at this point about a movie which I didn't particularly like. Hope you enjoyed it. If so, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, hitting that notification bell, and leaving a comment down below. But thanks again for watching. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.